Welcome to At Altitude. The active duty Air Force made it about 90% of the way to its goal of 26,877 enlisted recruits for 2023, but they still fell short by about 2,700 airmen. The Air Force Reserve and the Air National Guard missed their recruiting goals by 30%. It represents the first recruiting shortfall in over 2 decades. Only the Space Force, for which the Air Force Recruiting Service is responsible, surpassed its enlisted goal of 472 new Guardians. When Brigadier General Christopher Amrhein took over the command of AFRS in June of this year, he took a seat directly behind the 8-ball. Were it not for the dedication of his command staff and recruiters who quickly shifted to a wartime ops tempo, the numbers could have been much worse. But Amrhein knows this kind of surge is not sustainable by his recruiters. Other changes have to occur. A slew of changes to policies governing drug use, body composition, tattoos, and other barriers to enlistment softened the blow without compromising quality. The Air Force has even raised the maximum age for recruits from 39 to 42. All told, these changes have added more than 1,000 new airmen to the force. Still, there are only 1,900 Air Force recruiters spread across the entire United States, some of whom are the sole face of the force for hundreds of miles. And while AFRS aims to add 100 new recruiters in the next year, still, those 2,000 recruiters will have less than half of their work week to meet face-to-face with potential recruits. Administrative work like tracking down medical histories and dealing with entry waivers to move recruits forward in the process requires a heavy and time-consuming lift. Hitting fiscal year 2024 goals is going to require changes in staffing, software, brand promotion, and increased virtual interaction with recruits trying to navigate the process. Amrhein feels his command has proven its grit over the last 6 months and has the agility to try new approaches and processes to convince more Americans to serve their country as an airman or guardian. Let's hear what he's got in mind. I'm Joe Edens, and you are at Altitude.
Yes.
And I understand that you are the commander of Air Force Recruiting Service.
Yeah.
But I will relay an experience that I had.
Sure.
When you're around here
Yeah.
or around Right Pat, you can't shoot a spitball without hitting somebody that is affiliated with the Air Force in some way, whether
Right.
it be uniform, family member, civilian, what have you.
Yes.
There's places in this country where they not only don't know, but they don't know that they don't know.
Right.
And so I did a story about a guy who was running, a captain who was with the ROTC cadre at Cornell, and he was up there getting his PhD.
Mm-hmm.
And he made it a point himself to go and work with the civilian undergrad engineering teams so that they could see somebody in uniform
Yeah.
who was getting his PhD paid for and was doing cutting edge research. He wasn't rubbing people's noses in it,
No.
but he was making that visible. So maybe, we'll get around to all the questions we have on here, but how responsible is every single airman in being a recruiter?
I think that's a fantastic lead in. It's incredibly important, and exactly the story of what you just told is the aim when we say every guardian and airman are recruiters. Is there's an element of go telling your story, but there is also the getting into the community, getting into the spaces that that maybe the lack of familiarity, which is a growing thing within our country. And as you said, in some spots, there's brand awareness and then brand relevance, right? And in some areas, we've got to get back to brand awareness. And within that, there's a element of, and I tell our recruiters this, I tell airmen this, I tell them when I was over at 19th Air Force, I told them when I was a wing commander, you need to have a 30-second, a 2-minute, a 5-minute, a 20-minute version of your life, of why you decided to join, what keeps you in.
An elevator pitch, just like
absolutely. And you don't. It doesn't have to be rainbows and unicorns, but I'm not sure anything in life is. And so there is an element, especially with today's generation, that they'll know when you're not, when you're not being genuine. But our retention is really at an almost an all-time high, and at least on the active duty side. And so there's something there that's keeping people in. And that's part of what I would call the value proposition. But you've got to have, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but you've got to have this, when you're in the grocery store and somebody's in line and they ask you, are you in the Air Force? Heck, even in my flight suit, sometimes people go, are you in the Army? I go, no, I'm a pilot. I'm in the Air Force. Oh, how long have you done that? And you go into that version of the story, and is there anything I could maybe, are you interested? Is there anything, there? But then there's also an element of, just like you said with the engineer, that goes into very specific groups that goes, hey, you all are doing this cutting edge technology. The Air Force has invested in me to do this, or the Space Force has invested in me to do this. And there are opportunities that are there for you as well. If you're interested, there's the no kidding practical application of what you do, what I would call the targeted message, versus the general message to anybody that's out there. And they're two different discussion points, but they're all aimed at the same thing, which is to enhance brand relevance for our force and to show them that there are a lot of job opportunities that are there.
Yeah, and also it's one of those things with getting the STEM talent. This is
Yes.
an increasingly, Air Force has always been on the leading edge technologically, but it's an increasingly more digital force. And being able to, I'm quite sure that there's a lot of, well, I think I'm going to go out to Silicon Valley and I'm going to get a great job at a gaming company. And the reality is they're going to be sitting there banging out just simple code for
Lines of
some little axe that somebody's carrying or something like that day in and day out. Whereas, do you think that that's one of the competitive pitches the Air Force can make, is that you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be doing something that is protecting this country, that you're going to be doing something really worthwhile right out of the gate?
I think that is a huge element of it. And as I said, our value proposition is something that probably every element of industry or a profession has. I think ours is unique in the aspect of, opportunity, but also the culture of who we are, who we are as a community, and then the purpose, which gets to your point at the end. And people may come in for any one of those three. That's that scheme of the mix of what brought them in or what keeps them in may change over time. In fact, I would offer it does. But the opportunities that are out there are kind of the first portion of really informing those that aren't aware of what our Air Force has to offer. And that could be from either the job skill that you will have coming in, the educational opportunities that are there, whether they're there on the front end, such as college loan repayment for up to about $65,000. We'll take that debt off as you come into our Air Force. But I don't know of many companies that you could walk in and say on day one, here is my negotiating position. And oh, by the way, it's the military that's offering that, not the potential talent that's coming through the door to say, we're going to give you 30 days off plus several federal holidays. You will have world-class medical care, not only for you, but if you have dependents, without any stipulations on the dependents there at all. We take that on. That's part of our promise to Force and Family. The education opportunity, not only what I had kind of mentioned, but for those that enlist, they are automatically enrolled in the Air Force Community College. It's a fully accredited associate's degree. We're the only service that offers that. And then there's also tuition assistance while you're serving, that you can get an advanced degree, whether that be a bachelor's, master's, or even PhD. There's additional commitment that comes with that, but it can be concurrent with assignments or others. And then and then there's the Montgomery or the post 9/11 GI Bill. And just in my time, that was a game changer to the fact that when I came in, I was under scholarship for ROTC the last couple of years, so I wasn't eligible for the Montgomery GI Bill. But all veterans post 9/11 that had time left in service or met the qualifications were eligible And so as post 9/11 GI Bill came into play for me, I have been able to offset some of my children's college expenses based on that. And so that's just the opportunity for the individual. Then you talk about the culture and community that we are. That when you relocate inside our Air Force or Space Force, there's somebody to welcome you to your new organization. There's a sponsor that kind of catches you beforehand, gives you the insights of what it's going to be like at the new station, and then you fall in on an organizational structure that you're familiar with. And I think that is very unique. And oh, by the way, whether you live on base or off base, those that have that tie with the military are very aware. When I go out of town, and oh, by the way, I'm on the road quite a bit in this job, but I have been my entire career. There's always been somebody that picked up the phone or rang the doorbell that said, "Hey, Kathy, I realize Chris is out of town. Is there anything you need?" And I will tell you that has been, um, that's been very well welcomed and paid forward and paid back. And because there's different elements of when we had little kids, that ask for, "Hey, is there anything you need?" Yeah, I could use an afternoon off, right? It's there. I remember one time we lived in Spokane, Washington. We had a blizzard that came through, and three of my squadron buddies went and shoveled out our driveway without asking. She just came out one morning and it was all cleared out for her. So that culture and climate, community, who we are is I think it's unlike any other. And then to your point on the purpose, the why. Why is it that we get up and when we put our uniform on, we're doing not only this skill set that we've been trained very, very well in, and highly sought after. If you go out into the civilian market, it's a highly sought after thing. But we're doing it in the defense of our nation, to protect our community, our family, our way of life. And I think those things, when we get down to it and can get that message out and about, man, I didn't realize that. And so very powerful message.
We kind of talked a little bit about it, but just briefly, kind of your background in the Air Force, commands, stops that you've been in. You can start with ROTC on. We'd love to hear about what you're bringing experience-wise to this command.
Sure. So I would offer that I'd back up even before ROTC, and what brought me in is we had mentioned a little bit earlier. I didn't necessarily have a recruiter, but I did, and it was in the form of my dad and all of his fellow airmen that were in and around the house. And so I grew up in a military and Air Force family. And so that was kind of an inspiration for me. I remember walking the Lackland Parade Field when I was about 6 or 7 years old, and that was the same parade field my dad graduated from when he entered basic training. He was also a military training instructor, so that had a lot of memories for him that he could talk to me about. And then he became an aviation cadet and flew in many aircraft over his career as a bombardier navigator. So I had that experience, and at some point, probably in middle school, I went, you know what, I think I'd really like to do this. When I was a senior in high school, there was a game-changing event for many people, and it was called Desert Storm. And that was a point that took I think this would be neat, and put that probably the defense of the homeland and being a patriot spark into me to say, well, I'm going to the University of Texas, but I want to serve. And so that's what got me. We talked a little bit about into ROTC, and then I was had a wonderful experience there, and then was fortunate enough to get picked up to go to pilot training. Went to pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base in delightful Del Rio, Texas, 150, 60 miles off of 90. And it's grown a lot since then. I think when I went through, people that were there in the 60s and 70s would probably say it had grown a lot. But I got there in 1996, and was there through 96 and part of 97 while I went to pilot training. And pretty awesome. I got to pay back some of those things to my dad. He saw me solo in a T-37 for the first time. He made the drive out there, saw me get thrown into the dunk tank. Yeah, it's kind of neat. He commissioned me, pinned my wings on me, so that followed through. Fast forward, I went off to KC-135s at Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington. And as I graduated from pilot training, I remember Gary Winneberger, Colonel Winneberger was a wing commander. We walked across stage and we got our wings and diploma and shook our hands. And he looked at me and he said, "Chris, don't be surprised if you're flying in combat within a year." And I'm like, this is 1997. We aren't at war with anybody. The Berlin Wall had fallen almost a decade earlier. And so I went, wow, that kind of hit me. And I went, yeah, okay. I'll flash forward after about a year of being a 135 co-pilot. I got a phone call in late March, early April of 1999. And they said, hey, we need somebody we're getting everybody out the door and we need you to go over to Europe. There's things that are kicking up over Kosovo right now. And I said, well, I kind of have leave on the books. My in-laws are coming in. And they said, so, and I said, well, I said, is this, no kidding, you're, launching the entire, and they go, yeah, we are. And I go, then I'll be there. My leave was canceled. 24 hours later, I took off, flew into England. And about 24 hours after that, I remember sitting in the vault, getting the intel brief, and then we pushed up the throttles on a max gross weight takeoff. And the last thing that went through my mind as we were taking the active is Gary Winneberger was off by about 6 months. So that was kind of my intro in early stages. I finished out that assignment and actually came back down to Laughlin to be an instructor. I really wanted to fly the airplane behind me, the T-6. It was brand new at the time, and so I did that for a couple of years, loved it. Had some thoughts of getting out of the Air Force actually at the time, and I had a very great squadron commander that grabbed me and said, I was in for, our midterm feedback session or whatever, and he's like, hey, what are your plans? I go, I think I might be getting out in about 18 months. I don't know. I'm a young captain. I liked being back in Texas. And he said, hey, close the door. About 2 hours later, after a long discussion, he said, look, I'll support you in whatever endeavor you would like. But I really think that, that the Air Force has a spot for you. And so.
That sounds like that was your recruiter.
That was.
Mid-career.
That was my mid-career recruiter. I talked to Kath. Lo and behold, we're here. My squadron command tour, I'll flash forward a little bit, was out at Al Udeid for a year. I was commander of the 340th Air Refueling Squadron. Pretty big operation. I think we had about 50 airplanes, 75 crews, one of the largest squadrons in the Air Force, and from a flying squadron perspective anyways. And I had airplanes up in Iraq. I had a detachment up there and the preponderance of air refueling in Southwest Asia for about a year. Came back, I did some schools and some staff jobs for a little bit, and then had the opportunity to go be the vice commander out at Kadena Air Base, the home of the 18th Wing. After that, I was fortunate enough to be named the commander of the Bloody 100th at RAF Mildenhall in the United Kingdom. Another wonderful assignment, command opportunity there. Had an amazing team and learned a lot. Learned a lot out in the Pacific and then as well in Europe. Had some unbelievable leadership bosses, great NCOs, and just a fantastic work ethic all around. Then I went from there. I did a tour in Afghanistan, post-wing command. I was the AMCIG for about a year, and then I got a call from 19th Air Force Commander that said, hey, we'd like to bring you down here and be the deputy. I did that for a little less than 2 years as a deputy commander in 19th Air Force, and then General Robinson gave me a phone call and said, hey, we're thinking about nominating you to be a recruiting commander. And of course that's put me in here, and after a chief of staff's blessing on that, here I am.
So all of that, let's talk about your duties here.
Sure.
And then let's talk about how that experience has informed your duties here.
Yeah.
What intent is going down the chain of command, and how is it informed by that past?
No, that's really good. So, my duties here are to be the commander of Air Force Recruiting Service, which is really in charge of total force recruiting. In various aspects, we have active duty supporting Air Force Reserve Command as well as the Air National Guard in some elements. On top of that, it's all the active duty enlisted accessions. We do OTS, and then we do some breakout. Special warfare is a breakout that we have. We do the recruiting for Space Force as well. So we are the Guardian recruiter, and then as well as that, we really do all of the medical accession processing, if you will, whether that be officer or enlisted, to include the academy and ROTC.
Great. So let's kind of spin back around to that experience. What
Sure.
helped it? What of that helped you prepare for this, and what of that experience has kind of informed, how you've passed down intent to your command?
Sure. Well, the intent to the command is to truly transform the recruiting environment, or the recruiting aspect, given the current environment. I don't think we'll be ever back in a state in 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8, 10 years ago. We've got to be able to understand the new paradigm, be able to put either virtually or physically faces and spaces that we may or may not have been before. But also, it is to take this total force concept and make it to where we really are integrated to the maximum extent possible. And I think my predecessors have really put us on an unbelievable path. And my aim and guidance from General Robinson was to take that baton from General Thomas before me and take it farther down the field. And so our mission and vision statements are captured to focus on total force recruiting for Air and Space Force, and in an enduring presence. So, and the reason that word enduring is important, that it is the enduring service of choice, is that there are opportunities past your first, second, third assignment for those that want to go to the Guard or Reserve. And so we want to make sure that we are supporting and in that role to educate and communicate and support our reserve group that is tasked with that from the reserve side, and then support the Air National Guard in each of their states as the best we can to be able to provide that. So that's a little bit of what my intent is to do.
But let me ask you about this, though, if you could go one step, and if this
Sure.
is out of the lane, that's fine. But you're talking about the Joint Force and supplying for the Joint Force. But with AFRGEN, we're really talking about, or the total force, we're talking about the Joint Force being able to make airmen who can interact across the spectrum
Sure.
of the forces. Because as former CSAF Goldfein used to say, I'm not coming at you with an F-35, I'm coming at you with all of it.
That's right. That's right. So where I would take that total force point and then expand it into, to your point, that the joint element is our job is to inspire, educate, and recruit. And I think in the inspire, educate aspect, there is a talking about your, being part of something even bigger than yourself, even bigger than our Air or Space Force. It's part of our, our joint force that we present. Do we necessarily prepare them for that? I think we do an education piece in it, but really our job is to fill the seats so that 2nd Air Force can get them trained. And then when they get to their operational units, they will learn the joint interoperability. And so that we are step one in really combat readiness. Combat readiness begins with recruiting.
Great. So let's kind of spin back then. What in your past experiences has informed?
So I think one of the things that really prepared me coming in here as best as it could was when I was at 19th Air Force, our job was pilot production, all aviator production, to be honest. But there is a challenge there. And so understanding how to be creative on opportunities, levers we could pull to expand production, was what we really focused on hard at 19th Air Force. So coming into this seat, I had that lens set of it's production, but now it's production for the entire Air Force. How do we do that? How do we get for those in the Air and Space Force to make sure that we're recruiting the best talent that we have, and that we get them into seats as quickly as possible? So there was a kind of a little bit of, hey, I can relate here. And so you can go, hey, when we say we need to think outside of the box, or I'm okay with a blank canvas, and let's try some levers to see where we can go with that. And if they don't work, okay, let's find it out early, but let's not leave anything, on the cutting room floor
Did
to
you
do
get
that.
at 19th? Did you get that fail forward, fail fast, fail
Abs-
forward kind of thing
Absolutely,
plugged in?
we did. It was really big, and uh, and I think the pilot training transformation that occurred, and I had an opportunity to be a part of. Let me be clear that was something I fell in on and then learned from while I was there. Uh, but it's like, well, okay, that didn't work, but let's do a small group tryout, and then let's see if we can scale it. And so coming in here again, a lot of the initiatives were well underway with the vice chief of staff's sprint, CFT sprint, to do this, which is really a cross-functional team for the acronym there of CFT, but to really look at what are potential barriers, and then what are incentives, or what are things we need to look at in a different way to expand opportunity. And if they don't work, they don't work, but let's try them. And so that I kind of brought over from 19th.
So are there any things? I mean, obviously the elephant in the room is that we missed targets by 10%.
Yep.
But this is an opportunity to reach out and try new things. Haven't been in the seat long,
Yeah.
but are there things that have been tried or are coming down the pike that are showing promise specifically?
Yes, absolutely. So with regard to the vice chief's initiatives that we talked about, those really were only phased in some way, shape, or form over the last 6 months or so. And we estimate we've garnered an additional 1,000 recruits because of that. And we think in a full year's worth, just on those initiatives alone, some of those that I'll talk to, revised tattoo policy, aligning our body mass with the DoD standard, as well as the college loan repayment, being more a quicker path to citizenship. Those are all some of the levers that have been pulled, and in a full year, we think we can get more than 2,700. That expands to that pool, going into different areas we didn't think we would be able to identify talent. So there's promise there. I think you just saw the edge of it in this year, at the end of this year. What I would offer is yes, we're going to miss by about 10%. Without some of these initiatives and a total surge by our recruiting force, we could have missed by a lot more, probably closer to 16 to 18%. So, you basically taking, what is that, another 50% or more out of, that it could have been a lot worse. And the other thing that we learned from this is some of the smart operations. So not only were people, out and about in full force at a very high op tempo, it's what are the ways we can do some things smarter? What are the back to basics that we need to be revisiting from tactics, techniques, and procedures? And those things will endure. And we're walking into FY24 with a higher, what I would call bank of folks that are already pre-qualified and waiting, much higher, almost twice as high as it was when we walked into 2022 to 23. And so that'll be helpful.
Is there any kind of, as far as moving forward, are we trying as best we can to address specific needs in AFSCs, or are we just throwing a net and hoping we catch someone?
No. So one of the AFSCs, there's a couple right now that we have a challenging environment to recruit to. One of them is special warfare. And so we have bolstered our marketing aspects to really be able to educate and have brand awareness to get to brand relevance for our special warfare folks. We've expanded for special warfare. We have a contractor team that actually takes folks that we think would be successful, because that is a very tough program to get in and then get through. So as they're going through the recruiting process, that we have trainers essentially that will assess them and then give them a training plan as they're waiting to come in, so that they maintain or on-ramp that physical fitness element, and it's not such a shock to the system when they come in to do that. And we've seen some pretty good gains in that. The other one is in some of our highly specialized maintenance fields. Those are ones that that when we look the talent that we bring in, we look at and go, hey, can we maybe expand the opportunity to them or options to them from that standpoint? So in other words, when you come in, you may be qualified for a whole host of things. And we do let airmen, put down and our guardians kind of what aspect they would be interested in. But part of that is also saying, hey, you tested really well here. And we think that you would be really, really good at doing some of these specialized maintenance aspects to get them to do that. And so we've started to see a good return on that, but we've got a lot of work to do in that space.
So, given that we are in a situation where we have turned rather sharply away from the war on terror
Yes.
and into a peer adversary
Yes.
situation, you think we're going to continue to have an all-volunteer force? And what is the positive of having an all-volunteer force?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really appreciate you asking this. At least from the seat that I'm in, I don't see us right now. There's no indicators to walk away from the all-volunteer force. I'll start with the latter part of the question first, which is the aspects of what an all-volunteer force brings. It brings an unbelievably high quality and caliber of individual into our military, and that's regardless of service that you go into. I think that is the overwhelming. There is the compelling argument of the quality of the individual that you get makes up for the numbers that you may shortfall or be in excessive if you're looking at that. So I think for that reason alone would be the biggest one. As far as the shifting to the near peer threat, what I would offer is that it is incumbent upon me and all of us as recruiters to be able to make sure people understand the seriousness at and the inflection point we are at with regard to near peer and why we need that talent to come in. And I think when I go back to that value proposition, you get to that purpose piece in there, and whether folks are inspired at the purpose piece for their local community, their local family, or the nation as a whole, every element of that can be satisfied with that purpose piece of why you're coming in.
So let's talk about the fact that one would assume, looking at it at face value, that being the recruiter for both the Air Force and the Space Force
Yes.
is a new level of complexity. Or does that help your efforts in that you're able to offer more choices to potential recruits?
I would agree with that statement. The last statement you had is there's more opportunity that is there. The numbers that we bring into the Space Force are at a much smaller level. We normally bring in, at least this year, and we are meeting goal across the board for the Space Force, just under 500 accessions, versus close to 30,000 on the active duty side, plus another, 15 or so with the Guard and Reserve from the Air Force side of things. And so recruiting has almost two demand signals when you look at, you're identifying the talent that you need to come in. In fact, we just met with the Chief of Space Operations, General Saltzman, and by all means, the quality of the individuals that we're bringing in, Space Force is very happy with. Making sure that is an individual that wants to play the long game. That's their development model. It's very cylindrical versus what you would call maybe a normalized pyramid of accessions over time. And so making sure that we are able to inform and educate that as part of why we need you in our Space Force is incredibly important. We are about to get some guardians to be actual recruiters for us. It is something that is absolutely welcomed given the small footprint, recruiter footprint overall the Air Force has compared to the other services. Right now we have 24 airmen that have been educated within space operations to be able to speak intelligently about it. But there is an element of credibility there when you have someone that's been there and done that in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's going to be a great positive as we go forward.
And I think that there's, getting that to happen, I think there's still a lot of kind of unawareness of what Space Force actually does.
Absolutely. And to that point, the awareness writ large is an area that we have to do better in. And our marketing is built on that. Our outreach campaigns are built on that. It is, every airman and every guardian is a recruiter, and you need to be able to tell your story. From the Space Force element, it's probably the hardest one for America, to relate to because you can't see it and you can't touch it. And what I would argue is, but you can. Ask anybody how they drive to the grocery store. They probably use their cell phone and GPS. Well, that's Space Force for you, ensuring a freedom of navigation for all. Ask somebody how they are going to go get money, whether they actually use the ATM to pull cash out of. That has an element of Space Force in it, or your banking system writ large, all in Space Force. How we communicate is all through. All of that has to be protected. And so just because you can't see it doesn't mean you can't touch it, because it is part of everybody's daily life. And that has nothing to speak to, the actual, the space launch missions that happen out at our Delta wings on the East and West Coast. There's just a whole host of things. There is a myriad of objects up in space, I'm sure you're familiar with, called space junk. Well, you got to track all that, and make sure, because that, a little piece of material that's doing 20,000 miles an hour in some kind of an orbit around the Earth has to be tracked, because it can be pretty disastrous. And so, all of that, I think, and it's exciting. The opportunities for the Space Force, the growth that's likely there is pretty fascinating. And so making sure that we can take advantage of where we are with Space Force recruiting and sustain that in the out years is a big focus for me. And then taking our Air Force across the line to elevate. You had mentioned we missed by 10% on the active side. And here's why I'm cautiously optimistic going into 24. Those initiatives that I had talked about, we think there's going to be about 2,700 or so, plus or minus, that will be additive in the long run, over a year's period. Our medical processing timeline, there has been a piece called MHS Genesis. The name is the only thing, there's nothing I can really tell you in the name other than it onboarded from a utopian standpoint, a really good idea to be able to look back in electronic records, to have the most comprehensive medical history we've ever had. But within that, now flag things that take longer to adjudicate, 3 times longer. Used to be about 30 days to medically assess someone and get them through. Now it's up to 90. And so we had about 4,000 airmen last year alone that walked away from the process because the medical took too long. That is why the first thing coming in for me was, how can we get after medical accession time? What can we do within my space? We have some medical contracts that are going to come online to help take that piece out of the recruiter aspect, the back and forth between the medical processing center and the member, and get it into someone that is familiar with medical terms, that has access to medical records, and can help screen and condense that a little bit. I've also challenged our surgeon, who does the medical accessions waivers for all, to expand and look at where it is smart and or make recommendations if it's above my level operationally to accept risk, where we can waive things to get talent into the Air Force. And so those two things alone, 2,700, and I would offer that with our waiver rate right now at about 65 to 70%, we had 4,000 that walked away. Even if we got half of them across the line, all right, now we're talking 4,700. Smart ops and some other things where we're starting to, get ourselves bolstered, expanding the recruiter network. And this year we're going to be short by about 2,900. So you put those things together and start pulling those levers. That's why I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to make goal.
And so let's talk about those kind of, for lack of a better term, people throw around the term roadblocks, which
Yes.
sounds horribly negative. But there are roadblocks. And not only just the face-to-face, but how does technology come into that?
Sure.
How does AI come into that?
You
Being
bet.
able to make these processes more efficient and faster.
Yeah. I will tell you that technology is an enhancer and a game changer for us. Our Air Force Recruiting Information Network, AFRS is its nickname, is a really old system. And we actually just went on contract to put AFRS 2.0 in place. It'll take a couple years to onboard, but it has the ability not only to process information, but take it from multiple sources much quicker, be able to communicate with the recruiter and to the various touch points within that process that need to occur, that we think will gain efficiencies in excess of 25%. The other thing with regard to technology, I said we have a pretty light footprint. There are about 1,800 total force recruiters on the bag or on the line every single day. And I will tell you that if we need to be in more spaces. And one of the ways that we've figured out to be in some of those spaces is called the e-recruiter. And it is literally a virtual recruiter that takes leads, we call national leads. They go through a refinement center. All right, that's all off of technology based because it's not recruiters that are doing this. This is an external piece that comes in and looks and says, you know what, these leads are now ones that we would think are very highly competitive, and then gets it to an e-recruiter. And an e-recruiter will take that and get it all the way up until you're about ready to go to MEPS and ship. And so I've challenged the team of how much can we expand it. We had initially 5 or 6. This year we grew to 21. And I've asked what is the limit that we can expand that to. And I haven't got the answer yet back, and I'm really excited about that possibility because it takes that and really bridges where we can't be or because of bandwidth, we can't be in 2 places at once. So that's a great opportunity within technology that we're looking at to expand our recruiter network.
I know that there's a lot of legal things that can and cannot be done as far as data acquisition, but
Yeah.
is there anything technologically wise to target recruits for needed AFSCs?
Yeah, I will tell you I'm not a fan of the word target, but really within our marketing strategies, there are elements that we start to find traits, just like any of the other marketing aspects that are out there, that then start to identify these traits that go, hey, you might be fit, and a good fit for our Air and Space Force. And so how we can expand on that, and it doesn't always have to be technological. It's more of some of the marketing aspects that we have expanded on. Women in sports has been one that we have really taken a big piece in just this year. I don't know if you watched any of the FIFA, the Women's World Cup there, but we were sponsors for that. We had advertisements that went out throughout that, messaging that went through that. There were billboards that were aligned, and expanding that is where we get to brand awareness to then get to brand relevance in that aspect. So that's a piece in our marketing, I think, that is, if you want to call it a searching for, a specific market set or market share, then that is an element of how we've done that. And there are other areas as well, because what that does is it takes that brand awareness and expands it to then we can grow a greater diverse population to come into our Air Force, inspire them to come into our Air Force. My message every time I talk to anybody is you can be anything you want in our military. You can be anything you want in our Air Force or Space Force. We are a meritocracy. And so don't ever let anybody say, that's not for me, or, that's for you to choose. But go in eyes wide open. You can do anything you want in our Air and Space Force.
What is it about having that diversity that makes us a more lethal and ready force?
Absolutely. One, it makes it makes folks see that if you can see it, you can be it. And obviously our military needs to be a reflection of who we are as a country. And so when you have that combination, I think it is a winning one. It also brings in differing perspectives of how you grew up, the things that you think about. And I will tell you that in any command organization, one of the most important people that are in the room that normally I appoint as, hey, I need you to be the red teamer on this. I need you to tell me, what are the gaps and seams that are there. And when you have diversity of thought, diversity of experience, they can come in and give those perspectives that sometimes groupthink or the way we've always done it does not maximize the result of what you can get. It may yield a result, but boy, when you bring in that diverse element, diversity of thought, perspective, opinion, you really can maximize the capability that's out there. When you get these kind of quality airmen and guardians into our force, they bring something that I would call as the game changer, which is we find a way to solve a problem when nobody thinks there is one. And that's why the quality of the all volunteer force is so important, because you can lock people into a room and say, I don't know how we're going to solve this, and they'll figure it out. And that's inspiring to me, to be able to go, hey, they're going to figure it out.
So going kind of spinning back then, any other roadblocks that we need to get after?
I really would like to expand our medical accession process. And I don't mean expanded in time, I mean contracted in time, but explore the possibilities of within there from an operational risk lens set to see if we can garner better talent. And right now, there's only 23% of Americans, at least the youth that we're looking at to come into the service, that would be qualified without a waiver. And yet the talent pool that's there it is a lot higher. And so if I can get a medical waiver that is operationally risk acceptable, even though for generations it's been, no, we don't waive that, or it's disqualifying, I'm ready to ask the question why, and can we get past that a little bit, knowing that either our medical technology can supplant the reason that it was disqualifying before, or the talent and the quality that we bring in by waiving that exceeds the risk of countering against that. That's really where I aim to see can we get through that a little bit. And I will tell you that we've had some initial marked success with that. I think there is appetite to expand that, not only from the Air Force perspective, but I've talked to my joint colleagues in recruiting commands, and they feel the same way. And so I think there's opportunity that's there to get a bigger chunk of those that otherwise would be qualified. And right now, I'm going to throw a couple numbers at you, but right now in any given year, you have about 20 million Americans that are in the bubble that I would call the 18 to 24-ish bubble that are normally coming in for, or would be coming in for service. When you get to those that are academically qualified, we now get down to about 4 million. And when you get to the academically and physically qualified, that bubble shrinks a little bit more. And when you get to those that are propensed, which have some inclination to get there, we're down to 370,000 people. And when we need to bring in, just for the Air Force and all three components alone, 45,000 or so. The Army, I think, is around 65,000. You start, and the Navy is, you start running into, that's a huge market share. If you go, I want more than 10% of a market share, that seems like it would be a lot to me. And yet, if I can expand, we think there's about 1.7 million fence sitters that are out there that could be propensed, but something may be holding them up. Boy, I want to tap into that. and see if there's a spark that we can get them in. And if this is a way to find that talent, that's where I want to go.
So we've talked a lot about what you want to get, who you want to get. How do we keep out people that we don't want to get?
Sure.
How are we filtering out
Yeah.
extremists,
Absolutely.
racists?
Yes. So there is a very robust, vetting process when those that are coming in to be recruited as they go through, just like there is for medical. And that, that background review, if you will look at, criminal records. It'll look at, drug use records. It'll look at any affiliation or identification with extremism to make sure that those individuals are not coming into our service, and multiple checks along the way. It's not kind of a one and done, especially with the extremism aspect. There are multiple pieces that go through that go through the vetting process, and so I have pretty good confidence, really high confidence, that the screening for that aspect is where it needs to be.
Any other technological things like AFSEP? Anything you want to go over? I think we touched on a good bit of it.
I think there is opportunity with artificial intelligence in trying to understand maybe habit patterns of what would identify someone as marketable to come in, so that we can get to maybe some untapped areas that are out there. I think that is pretty huge. Maybe not technological, but one of our lines of effort is to really expand the total force recruiting network. And that goes beyond, when you hear total force, you think of the Guard and the Reserve and the active duty combined, they make the total force. But what I would offer is there are partnership potentials out there with organizations that are ready to help. AFA is one of them. They have started a recruiting task force to be able to understand the environment and then plug in where it helps, or where there are possibilities. So we're in the early stages of what that relationship could blossom into, but I think there's a lot of possibility there. And we're talking about an organization that has over 200 chapters across the United States. And so very much plug and play with local recruiting offices or with squadrons. And so there's an element there.
I was also thinking about, like the Aim High app or there.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Thank you. Thanks for bringing me back on
No
that
worries.
from technological. And honestly, this kind of ties in with that element of augmented force for total force, is giving them the tools that they can then educate those that are out there. And one of them is the Aim High app. It is an application that is, it is a one-stop, if you will, on Air and Space Force. It can point you in the direction of what all the job opportunities or career opportunities there are. It helps you. It says, need to find a recruiter. It can find who the recruiter is to start your initial lead if you want to make a contact there. There are opportunities for folks to put posts and videos in to show what it's like to be an airman or a guardian in there, and it's all on the phone. We also have Air Force and SpaceForce.com, and those are great. There is there's a link in off the app to get there, but most of this generation, heck, even I'm a digital convert or dinosaur, and I'm app centric now rather than actually getting on a computer to find a website. So that has been a very good synchronizing function, if you will, to get everything into one location to talk about our Air and Space Force.
And even streamlining the workflow, like click to sign
Yes.
and things like that.
Absolutely. You can some of those things. I would say we're probably the DoD is not always the fastest to bring, and for understandably, right? It's got to be proven. It's got to be fail safe. It's going to a massive bureaucratic organization. But yeah, click to sign, some things that we don't have to do in person anymore. Again, that falls back on the e-recruiter and the lead refinement center. There are technological. We're actually working on building out what we call a national asset for the Space Force. And I think it'll be a technological marvel, really, because We've got several of these and that give touch points of what you can do in our Air Force. This one is going to take VR and really get them to understand and experience as best they can what it means to be 62 miles up, what it means to be next to those satellites, what it means to be working on that, what it means to, monitor a launch or an operations center. And so that's another piece that we explore from technology to tell our story.
Yeah, just some of the other things, basic workflow things like MS Teams.
Sure.
How is that changing things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that was something I think that, FaceTime had been there. And I'm not, trying to say I'm, with regard to Apple or anything else, but it was there. What it took was a COVID environment to then figure out how are we going to communicate, whether it's MS Teams or any of these other, video technological services that prior to that, honestly, were some big monstrosity in a conference room rather than, or, and now it's like, hey, it can be hooked into your desktop, and then all of a sudden now we're at laptops, and now you're on your mobile device, and so the expansiveness of that has been able to bring our team together to be able to have recruiters talk, because they keep up with their recruits as they go through that process. It's not a one and done. They keep up with them. They tell them about the experiences, how are things going, and rather than to have an appointment where you have to bring somebody in, you can do a virtual appointment. You can do those while you're traveling from place to place rather than being in the brick and mortar facility.
So is that a message not only that's passed on to your recruiters, but that they pass on to their trainees, is that we have this resiliency, the ability to take something that is a terrible hurdle
Sure.
across all of society and come
Yeah.
up with answers to make things work?
I think it is. I think writ large for our nation, coming out of COVID, we learned a lot. One, it gets back to that point is we as Americans, we're resilient. We'll find a way to succeed. Doesn't mean there's not going to be sacrifice, but we will find a way to succeed. And we were successful in persevering through that. And then we took the lessons that we learned from any challenging situation, how can we apply that going forward? And so, we've expanded that. I am a huge fan of face-to-face. If I can have a face-to-face interaction, I'd rather do that. If I can do it in person, I really like to do that. But the reality is that's tough. There's only so many hours or minutes in the day. And when you have that, it expands your ability to talk to 3, 4, 5 people, where in the olden times, maybe you only talk to one.
But still, the face-to-face thing is fantastic, but, things like the enhanced counseling, I mean, how does that kind of marry in the technology, marry in with that ability to have a face-to-face discussion with potential recruit?
I think it's part of that, when you have those counseling sessions that go along, again, having to be able to do that, where even if you could have done it on a phone call previously, now when you can do it virtually and see the person, you can judge their nonverbals, you can see what concerns they have. If there's multiple people, if there's parents in the room that have questions, they can bring them up rather than, I think that's fantastic. And it builds that confidence, because we are the first touch point for people that are thinking about coming into our Air and Space Force. And it's incredibly important for us to communicate to them that they're joining a family. They are joining somebody that is going to take care of them. And that message starts from when they, have that first contact to when we ship them off. And then they're going to go to their BMT family, and they are going to have this connection point. Then they go to their tech training family, then they go to our operational family. I think that's important. I mean, I remember when I was a squadron commander, I was deployed, and so I got constant fill of deployed forces. And I asked if anybody wants me, I would write letters home to the parents, the spouses, the, brother, sister. I go, hey, I have a mission to do, but it's my job to ensure that I care and feed for your member that's serving, and I will do my very best. And I just wanted you to know I got them. And that message resonates. Our Undersecretary of the Air Force was just out at the Pocono 400 race and at NASCAR, which we are a partner with. And she was speaking to a group of airmen that were getting ready to swear in. It's calling depping in. And before she did that, she had an opportunity to talk with them. And it wasn't just them. Their parents were there. Their family members were there. And she had that exact same message. Hey, they're coming into our family. I realize they're going from your family into our family, but we got them. And I think that's an important message that starts from the word go when we meet them.
And you mentioned that in terms of BMT. So how in the intake portion are we preparing them for the stressors of
Yeah.
going through this, which may not be something that they're used to?
Sure. So that constant communication, I think the point that you had these touch points that the recruiter has with the member as they're going through the process to lay out expectations so that they understand that they will get that despite their concerns, there were 29 or 30,000 other folks that are going to take that same journey as you are, and you won't be alone in that. I have been out to some field visits just in my short time, and I've asked that same question. And some of the units that I've been to explain that they have orientation days where they will get folks and they will show them what day one could be like getting off the bus. So it takes that animosity down a little bit. I grew up in a military family. I still remember getting off at field training. I was nervous as heck, and the MTI jumped on the bus and was very loud in his communication. But it was to affect a point that we needed to move with a sense of purpose. So there are some of those things. The reminder of physical fitness and how important it is, not only to prepare you for what's going to be expected of you in basic training and, quite frankly, your military career, but also that builds an element of resilience in itself.
So we're talking about resiliency. Your recruiters have their own set of stressors
Yes.
involved. So how are we taking care of them? How are we keeping them resilient?
Yeah, absolutely. We ask in any given year, we ask a ton of our recruiting force. It is the leanest of all of the services. But this year we had to ask a little bit more from them. And we asked them to go into a sprint. And we ran that for almost 5 months at a high, what I would consider the deployed operations ops tempo. Understanding that you can't do that on an enduring aspect. Each of the commanders realized when it was time to start pulling back that op tempo. So that's a way of making sure that the command is aware of the recruiters and what they need. Making sure that we advocate for their special duty allowance pay, SDAP, that remains as a portion that they can work with. That we address their concerns when they come up, whether that be locally or if they need to be across the enterprise. I am really, I won't say concerned, but it is on my mind to make sure as these that are out and alone and unafraid in places that we don't have large base or military presence, where there are medical treatment facilities, that they have the access to the TRICARE providers that are in the area. So that is something that's on my mind to ensure that they can get the medical care that they need. We have just brought on for each of the groups a military family readiness counselor that really gets after preventative actions. It's a start to get one placed at each group. I think the demand signal is going to say a little bit more, but I'm really excited about, and I think the groups and the squadrons are as well, to be able to have someone that is a prevention specialist that can go out and identify things that they see before they need to become reactive, and then judge whether or not this is for a certain region, for the group, or for the whole command.
So having said that, demographics wise, you mentioned the partnerships that you have with AFA, other partnerships I'm sure with commercial or historically black universities, what else are we doing so that recruiters can get out into underrepresented communities and start making them aware of the possibilities with becoming an airman?
Yeah, actually, our Aim High Academy, I think, is a really good place that we can offer opportunity for folks to get familiarization in flying airplanes into underrepresented groups. We have a detachment called Det 1, and their mission is to actually expand opportunities to increase the opportunities for rated diversity amongst our force. And so their primary focus is on, when we say rated diversity, we're saying within the officer corps. One of the things I would like to see the expansion of that to our enlisted aviators as well, to expand the opportunities and the things that are there for that. So we give them up to, I think it's 15 hours of flying time that they get to go do. There are also AIM wings, and those are Air Force wings. All across active duty, Guard, Reserve have the opportunity to be what we call a dedicated AIM wing. And their mission, in concert with Detachment 1, is to find folks that are out there that maybe didn't realize that a career in the Air Force is something that they could do or pursue. We bring them onto the base. For those that have flying missions, and where we can, we'll put them on the airplane and give them some orientation. Mainly in our larger aircraft that we can get multiple people on, but we do that. We'll give them a tour of the facilities. If there are simulators we can put them in, we'll do that. For those that want to understand soup to nuts on aviation, those are opportunities as well that are there. And I think that we need to grow that even more than we have. But really the core for us in identifying that is our Det 1, and then it expands out.
Is there a synonymous Det 1 that exists or in the offing to address other things? For instance, I don't think many people are going to say who have dreams of being a firefighter say, I want to be a firefighter in the Air Force.
Sure.
How do we address things that are not necessarily sitting in the cockpit or working on an aircraft at the airfab?
I think one thing that is immediate is our Go Blue, Stay Blue campaign. And that was launched in April of 2023, really based off of Chief of Staff's initiative to the wings to kind of open up the gates a little bit. Post 9/11, we had closed some things, and it's understandable. But it is time now to get America back understanding. And the way you do that is get them on the installation. Show them what it is we do. It's also equally important to take those same airmen and get them out into the community. And so, to use your firefighter example, we do have crash, fire, and rescue on every installation, or almost every one. Are they exploring partnerships with their fire departments downtown, volunteer, or those that are in the profession of firefighting, if you will? So there are opportunities to do that, and it's not even limited to that. Whether it's defenders that have relationships with the local police communities that they're at. For our engineers, you go back to your topic of the university student that was in the Air Force and was going through an advanced degree for engineering. Well, how about our civil engineers, and how are they interacting with the Public Works Department, or how are they interacting with city planners so that they can understand that? Now, some of it may be real based on the job they have, but this ability to tell their story on what brought them in, the things that they do, and the possibilities that are there, I think really get to that point.
Yeah, it's not my cup of tea, but there's people out there who are interested in office management and
Yes,
finance and all those kind of
absolutely.
things, which are
Yeah.
absolutely necessary. So, are we bringing new recruiters on? And what do you tell someone who's considering it? And also, what do you tell somebody who's not considering it?
Sure. So we have been able to get approval to grow our end strength by 91 additional recruiters. Those will be phasing in over the next year or so as we bring them in. For new recruiters, they go through our development of special duty process. That if people want to be a recruiter, then they need to communicate that to their leadership and then get put in for this developmental special duty. But recruiting isn't for everyone. And so there's an element of, when we do this and we review, making sure that we're identifying the right talent, so we don't set somebody up that may not be the best fit. Now, it's not to say that some people may come in and not think they're going to be good at it, and they end up being exceptional at it. Our schoolhouse will get them there for that. And when I say our schoolhouse, it's really 2nd Air Force Major General Edmondson's schoolhouse that gets them prepared for that. But if folks want to volunteer, that's the opportunity, is to go through the DSD process. We also recognize that that talking to someone that is maybe more in their closer to their age is can relate a little bit better, and so we've started to move staff sergeant, and we're actually opening back up again for select areas and select airmen, senior airmen, to come be recruiters should they want to. For folks that don't want to be a recruiter, I would say my pitch is you're a recruiter no matter what. It just depends on whether you're a recruiter in Air Force Recruiting Service, or you're a recruiter because you talk about the profession, why you came in, why you stay, and the benefits you have. And there are challenges out there. I told you at the beginning of this, it's not all rainbows and unicorns, but I think the value proposition that we have when those challenges are there offsets that.
So we talked a little bit about it when we first started, but I want to come back to it because it's an important thing. The military in general, and particularly the Air Force, for quite a long time had a reputation for being a culture of a one mistake Air Force. And that culture has really begun to shift, and embracing calculated risk taking,
Sure.
fail forward, especially when we're in an accelerate, change, or lose type atmosphere.
Yes.
So maybe talk about, just in your personal career, was there a situation where you were supported by a supervisor in taking a risk on something, and the idea of failing forward, and how do you pass that down to your people?
Sure. So from a personal standpoint, there's probably a handful of them. There's probably tons of examples that I can't think of that just happened through the course of the career. But the one probably of most recent history was back in 2018. There was a series of strikes against Syria as a response to them using chemical weapons on their own people. And I was the commander at RAF Mildenhall at the time. And many wings in USAFE had a role to play in that response. Part of ours was generating the entire force, every tanker we had on that patch, and then disperse them to forward locations so they could be most effective with their offload to the receivers that were going to support the strikes and the target. And one of the locations, which was leading the first wave of that, had unbelievably horrible fog, really bad weather. And so there was confidence from the USAFE A3, who we had a conversation, and I said, hey, I think the crews are capable, but we're going to need some waivers to get airborne, because it's dramatically less than what the standard operating procedure is for visibility for takeoff. And it was a conversation. We agreed on what the right amount of feet would be that the crew could see for takeoff. I had a squadron commander that was forward deployed, and I said, hey, we're not forcing them to take the waiver. And they go, boss, they're good. And so that story actually came out in the AFA, the fall AFA of 2018. And I will tell you that taking the risk to do that was absolutely worth it. I will tell you, it could have turned out really bad. But there are some elements in that operational risk calculus when you're talking about leadership support of you, and then you banking on your airmen, is you trust in the confidence that they have been trained exceptionally well, that they are ready to accept the challenge, and then you've got their back in case something happens. And so that is probably one at probably a little bit later in my career that had that element to it. And it was supported all the way up the chain. It was kind of like, You know, and when you look at the pictures, you're like, man, I didn't know but it was the right thing to do. It was operationally risk approach, and they got the job done.
And so that experience that you've had, is
Yeah,
that something that you instill in your people here?
absolutely. You know, the piece in that is it, let's go ahead and see how it works. Let's take the operational risk. What is the cost benefit in doing this? And if we can go in there and get that, then I think that's absolutely where I want every subordinate commander to be, is and then they have to tell me the why, right? If you can tell me the why on things, and that's my commitment to the airmen too, that are within AFRS or any organization, is I owe you the why of what we're doing. And then I have that red teamer, right, that's sitting in the side, or that says, hey, I'm not sure that why is right. Okay, let's talk about it. But I think the push to mission command is right in line with that from the senior leadership aspect. You had mentioned, we've taken a culture shift in that, and and things are going to happen. But guess what? Great things are also going to happen when you get mission command pushed out and people understand what their commander's intent is, and then they go execute it. May not be the exact way they would have scripted it up, but you gave them the expectation of what they needed to get done. They know the tools and the bounds that they need to play in. If they're going to need to exceed those bounds, then there's a waiver process, and that we all, rather than just, well, this stops us. It's like, no, if we had a waiver for this, we could get this, this, and this done. And that's where I want the team thinking, and that's where they are thinking.
Okay, so we're up against it. We got to get you back to your life,
Yeah.
but there's one last, and I think the most important question.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, sir.
It's not that one that we talked about before. The most important question, quite frankly, is prefaced by this. We do our research, but we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So what should we have asked you that you want future recruits or your recruiters to know about the Air Force?
Well, I would start with, the fact that we our military awareness has it's really had a chasm over even my time in the military. If I would have been in a room with 100 people when I first came in the Air Force, and I asked the question that I ask now everywhere I go, is how many of you have a family member that has served in the military or is serving the military? About 45%, almost half the hands would have gone up. I ask that now, and it's more like 13 to 15%. And so we have to bridge that gap by informing where the stories used to tell themselves through the natural interaction of 50% of America, and so we have to make up that gap now, and so part of that is telling the story, which has kind of been a theme we've talked about, but also that the Air and Space Force do more than just fly airplanes and launch things. Okay, there are over 240 job opportunities within our Air and Space Force for folks to come do. And I will tell you, every one of them is required. I tell that story, that one about risk and how we had to get all the airplanes out in very short order. Well, that starts with a phone call that comes in to an AFSC in the command post. And then it goes to, one of 200 other organizations and touch points that go, this is my role in X, Y, and Z. And so understanding that every one of those 240 is so critical to what we do and has applicability out in the civilian sector. And I think that's a piece that I don't think a lot of America understands as much, and that we have a job for you. I talked to somebody in an elevator. It's like, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to do with your life? I haven't even talked to him about being in the military. So, hey, what do you want to do with your life? I'd like to be a firefighter. Oh, have you thought about being a fighter in our Air Force? We do that. And we do it at some pretty cool locations. We do some pretty great things with it. So telling those stories is very important, knowing that there is a delta just in my time in the Air Force on the interaction and familiarity of our military. We are in the profession of arms. That is a little bit different. There are other professions that are called professions out there. Everyone in our Air and Space Force, as well as all of the other military services, that purpose that we talk about, that is to practice and be the best at our profession, which is the profession of arms. You break that out into the actual AFSCs, or Air Force Specialty Codes, that people get brought in to do. And it goes back to that point of we need them in those specific jobs, in those specific numbers. If we didn't, then we wouldn't have a need for that AFSC. And one thing that my command chief, when I was a wing commander, really drove home, and I took it and passed that forward as well, is there's no such thing as just. When you talk to someone and you ask them what they do in our Air Force or Space Force, whether they're the most junior airman or the most senior airman, you go, how awesome is it for you to do your job every day? And they go, it's pretty cool. Well, tell me about it. And they go, sir, I'm just A. You can insert whatever it is. And you go, whoa, you're not just anything. You are. You are what that is. You are a defender. You are a medic. You are a doctor. You are a pilot. You are, a boom operator. You're, all of the 240, you are. There is no just, you are. Because that's how important it is for us to have that in that role, for you to come do that for our Air and Space Force.
And that's it for this episode of At Altitude. My thanks to Brigadier General Christopher Amrhein and all of the Air Force Recruiting Service working every day to supply the very foundation of the force of the future, new United States Airmen and Guardians. The At Altitude podcast is a production of Airman Magazine, headquartered at Defense Media Activity in Fort Meade, Maryland. You can find all of our content at airmanmagazine.af.mil, or you can look us up on Divots, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks for listening. Until next time.